Getting news out of 14th Avenue, the headquarters of MTN, one of the largest telecommunication providers here on this continent. Speaking to CEO Ralph Mupita about the company's latest results and what they had to offer over the operating period. Welcome to The Money Show.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated, and good evening to your listeners.
I guess let's start with the broader sense and dial into those numbers across all your 19 markets, if I'm counting correctly, and how things went over the period.
Yeah, I mean, we saw very strong commercial momentum across our markets. Nigeria, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, Uganda in particular showed very, very strong growth. In South Africa, we saw a starting off a recovery on our prepaid business, which had been a bit under pressure, but very good growth on the postpaid enterprise and wholesale side. So overall, very solid commercial momentum, which translated into, strong financial results. We recorded our highest EBITDA margin, probably for the last 12 or so years. So, that growth, turning into, very good financials. The other things that we highlighted from the results were really around progress we're making around the IHS acquisition. It's $2.2 billion equity value in terms of buying out the outstanding shareholders. We've had a successful EGM there. We're getting through all the regulatory processes, and we anticipate, the transaction should close by the end of this year, subject to regulatory approvals. And then finally, we're launching our buyback. We have a 6 billion rand share buyback. We'll cancel those shares on buyback as part of our capital allocation and driving our shareholder remuneration framework.
You had strong markets come through this time around, with Nigeria and Ghana pulling the rest of the group up, if one can put it that way. What did you do there differently that made sure that those numbers came correct?
Look, I mean, I think it's a portfolio effect. You will well remember, 2 years ago, Nigeria was not as strong a shape, and that's what a portfolio does, is that sometimes when, parts of the business are not doing as well, or there's some shocks, that you have, others that are kind of doing some of the heavy lifting. So Nigeria, the painful, period of, currency devaluation, depreciation that happened in 2024 kind of is behind us. And inflation has come down. The Naira is very stable. Demand for our services remain high. We're seeing just in this quarter two, very strong net additions, new customers coming onto our network. We've got 92 million Nigerians using our network on a regular basis. So a more kind of constructive, benign, let's call it that, macro environment, supported by kind of growth in digital services demand, that drove a very strong set of financial results, strong margins, strong cash generation, and so forth. So, that business continues to be a strong anchor. It's probably about a third of the earnings of the company at the moment.
MTN South Africa, not entirely bad, but quite flat compared to the rest of the units in your portfolio. What would you point that to? Is it a tough economic time in South Africa where people are not looking to acquire new cell phones through maybe a provider like MTN? What is it that made this particular unit more flat this time around?
Yeah, we registered 1.5 as service revenue growth from the prior period. And, it's the South African consumer is fairly resilient, to be clear. So we can't put it on the consumer as where, in terms of that there is not enough demand. Now, if you look at the different businesses within South Africa, wholesale is growing very strongly. We provide wholesale services to other parties that grew double digits. The enterprise is growing quite strongly, about 6% service revenue growth. The postpaid market, contract market, again, growing healthily above inflation. And prepaid data is growing well. The key issue is prepaid voice. We saw a deceleration on voice in the prepaid sector, and that's a big, bundle of revenue that has historically been there. We anticipate prepaid voice will continue to decline as people start using more messaging. So the big drag to performance is really around voice in South Africa. So it's quite specific. All the other areas are growing above inflation. The only area that's not growing above inflation is prepaid voice. Prepaid voice was down just over 10.5%. We have a reset program where we think in the next couple of quarters we should really be getting the South African business back to much healthier growth.
Then looking at, prepaid and people using airtime, especially in South Africa, when you speak to the banks, they'll tell you that, when times are tough in South Africa, consumers default on loans. Are you finding that those that do get airtime from you using airtime advances are also starting to default?
Well, actually, we're having a different experience because we took deliberate actions actually at the beginning of this year to reduce the extent of which we do this airtime advance. We've pulled that down. It's probably about half what we were doing at the peak in terms of monthly
and do you have that number?
Airtime advance. I won't say the number to you it's probably commercially sensitive, but I think you got to think of it. We reduced it to about half. Into our base. The repayments rates actually have improved. If I was talking to you in October last year, I would have said 50% pay within 30 days. We've got 70% now. So we really focused on, building a prepaid high quality base with the kind of appropriate reliance on airtime advance. So on the prepaid market, we had probably about 42% of our base was using airtime advance at any stage, down to very low 30s now. And I think at the low 30s levels, with repayments of 70% plus, it's pretty healthy.
We've seen in the US a lot of talk around sanctioning Iran, one of the markets that you were involved in. You have, I think, a 49% holding in Iran Cell still. Do you foresee maybe that sanction hitting you in terms of getting that capital, extracting it out of Iran?
Look, we've been, consistent that we want to exit the Middle East. We want to focus our efforts in Africa, and that's a strategy that we announced, more than 5 years ago, and we've exited Yemen, Afghanistan, Syria, and so forth. So the only market we haven't been able to exit is Iran because, sanctions came back in May 2018, and the sanction structure and the inability of Iran to be out of the SWIFT system, where money flows, meant that it's effectively a frozen asset. We can't put money in, we can't take any money out, and we're very diligent around following U.S. sanctions and ensuring that that entity complies, with U.S. sanctions and all the other sanctions. To be honest, that exist. We have a team out in Dubai that's constantly monitoring that. So our position is, there's very little we can do until there is the ability to exit. And I think the instrument that will enable us to exit is the point where, sanctions are removed, we would exit. That business is worth probably only 3% in terms of the earnings of the company, 7% of net assets. So it's actually financially quite small. We don't have any MTN secondis there. We last had MTN secondis, 3 of them, around the 14th of January. They've been out of the country. So it's effectively an investment without MTN participation at the moment.
All right, some clean set of results there for MTN, of course, saying their fintech business also up with 71 million users then in that part of the business. So that's working out for them. The mobile money as well, having some cloud backing from Ericsson. So a lot to build for MTN into the future. Thank you there to CEO Ralph Mupita for those, just going through some of those results and the numbers for the year.